I must say, I can't look at the current debt ceiling crisis the way most people do. To me, the question is not what the debt ceiling is supposed to do. The question is, what has the debt ceiling actually done? And the one thing it has not done is limit the debt. So the question is, what does it do? What it does is provide political cover for presidents who engage in runaway spending. I mean, consider the present situation. I mean, the Republicans are under the gun now. Now, all the spending that has created the problem in the first place was passed when the Democrats controlled all three branches of the government, when they had such overwhelming majorities in the Senate that Republicans had nothing to say about any of it. And yet, Republicans are now being invited to come in and share, in creating a program to deal with the problems that the president created. And if they don't do it right, they're going to get blamed, and they may well lose the 2012 election as a result. I've seen, in a vague sort of way, the two plans that are out there, one of which has no chance of passing, the other of which is so vague that I don't know what it'll be if it does pass. And the plan that appeals to me the most is that suggested by Moody's, the credit rating agency, which is that we get rid of the national debt ceiling, since it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and therefore any president who goes on a spending binge, he and his party alone will be held responsible for it unequivocally.
So you think the Republicans are making a political mistake in even threatening that they won't extend the ceiling?
Unless they are prepared to go to the wall. I don't know what their secret... They may have a secret plan that is beyond anything I've ever conceived and beyond anything Republicans have ever done before that will make this turn out right. I don't think so. Don't forget, they got hammered for the government shutdown during the Clinton administration, even though it was Clinton who shut down the government, and even though the Republicans voted enough money to keep the government open. So if they can't defend themselves under those conditions, why would we expect that they can defend themselves now? I hear a lot of people talking about if the Republicans do this and do that, then the onus will clearly be on the president. Well, clearly is in the eye of the beholder. And clearly is what you can get across to people. And the Republicans have not done any better job of getting across to people now than they did during the shutdown under Clinton.
Do you think it's because of an inability to explain themselves well, or because the press and the president are one?
Well, the press and the president are practically one. But even when the Republicans come on the air, they do a terrible job. I say terrible. No, you can only judge people by what they're trying to do. I don't get any sense that the Republicans leaders have any sense of urgency about articulation. I greatly admire Congressman Paul Ryan for coming up with a plan to try to deal with all this nonsense. But when he was explaining himself on television, he said in one sentence that there was the people who are currently on Social Security would not have their payments reduced, and he went on. That is such a huge central concern to people who are living on Social Security. You don't just say it in one sentence and go whizzing by. I think of the old-time preacher who was famous for his sermons, and someone asked him, why are your sermons so successful? He says, because I tell them what I'm going to say, then I say it, and then afterwards I tell them what I said. But that is not, with all due respect to Congressman Ryan, who deserves a lot of respect, you don't say it in one sentence.
Mm-hmm. Well, why? Look, this is a much larger issue. I have said often to my listeners that in the 20th century, the century I know best, the people who have basically sold bad ideas have been far more articulate than the people who sell good ideas. Why is that?
Well, if you're going to sell bad ideas, you have to be articulate. Any fool can prove something where the facts are plain. It's when you can get people to believe something for which there's one, not a speck of evidence, and two, there are mountains of evidence against you, that's when you are really articulate. Among the books that I consider the height of articulation are Unsafe at Any Speed by Ralph Nader and Imperialism by Lenin. I mean, they both were able to establish a set of conclusions in people's minds in utter defiance of mountains of evidence to the contrary.
Wow. Yeah, well, I know the Lenin book. I remember the Unsafe at Any Speed and the thesis, but I didn't read the book. Anyway, today, if you could articulate, if you had 2 minutes to the American people, what would you say?
Oh, my gosh. I would say move to Australia. But if the Australians have better immigration control than we do, then we
couldn't get in.
That's right. I'm really quite pessimistic. I'm hoping the Republicans merely have a setback rather than an utter catastrophe out of this debt ceiling thing.
You would really like them to say, look, this is the president's issue. We don't want to look like the party that closed down the government. The president wants to have more debt. Okay, we opposed it, my dear fellow Americans. Now it's up to you in the next voting.
Well, there's that, but I would, instead of having this thing where you turn over to the president the power to raise the ceiling, I mean, this is, why not get rid of the ceiling, which is what turning over to the president would mean in reality. But if that's what
exactly.
You're going to do, say that's what you're going to do. We're not going to play the debt ceiling game anymore. He ran up these bills, let him figure how to pay for them.
How do you answer the people who say, well, look, the under Clinton, we ran a surplus. If you only allow us higher taxes like under Clinton and bigger government, we'll have a balanced budget.
I think the idea of naming deficits and surpluses for presidents shows how unserious so many people are. All spending bills originate in the House of Representatives. So no president can take credit for a surplus or be blamed for a deficit unless his party is in control of the House of Representatives. After the Republicans gained control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years, then for the first time in many years, maybe 40, we had a surplus. It was the House of Representatives surplus.
Excellent. Back in a moment with Tom Sowell, one of the clearest minds living today. And if you read one book on economics, this perhaps should be it. Economic Facts and Fallacies, second edition. It's now out in paperback, and it is up at DennisPrager.com. I'm Dennis Prager, on with one of my favorite thinkers in the world today, and certainly in America, Tom Sowell, Senior Fellow, Hoover Institution. Newest book is Economic Facts and Fallacies, second edition. It's out in paperback. Maybe if you read one economics book, this might be the one you should read. And it hurts me to hear, even though I can't really argue with you, Tom Sowell, but you say you're pessimistic. Why don't you amplify on your pessimism?
I think there's several things. One is that not simply that we have bad policies, because bad policies were fatal. We'd have gone under a long time ago. We have policies. We have institutions being set up, and people put in those institutions that will create problems for this country long after the current administration is gone, whether they're gone after the next election or after eight years of Obama. You have, for example, one of the policies. The Obama administration is pressing lending institutions not to foreclose on people who are unemployed for a period of up to a year. Now, there was a time when individuals were expected to take account of the fact that it is possible to become unemployed, and therefore you don't spend your money right up to the last penny. You don't take on obligations that you can only meet if everything goes according to plan, which everything almost never goes according to plan. But now it's that there are some people selected by the government who can be as irresponsible as they want, and the government will rescue them at the expense of other people who are not in favor with the government personnel. And I think
That's all right. Go on.
And if you're going to have a country run like that, and you're going to have that be the ethos of the country, increasing over the generations, what you're doing is living off the capital, the cultural capital that you had in the past, but which you are simply using up without replenishing.
Well, when we were talking about the arguments that they give that they had the surplus under the Clinton, and you had pointed out that it was the Congress. If we had if the Republicans had the Senate now, do you think it would be any different?
Yes, I think it would, because they would be in a position to at least pass some legislation, which they cannot do now. I don't care if it passes unanimously in the House of Representatives. It will never become law because it won't pass in the Senate.
If you were able to be the designer, Emperor Sowell now designs the U.S. budget, where would you find $1 trillion in savings?
Oh, my gosh. I would start by eliminating the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education. God, I would shut down the National Labor Relations Board. There's just so many of these things out there. There's a joke that whenever someone wants to claim to be able to reduce the budget, they say they're going to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, and of course they never do. But there is enough waste, fraud, and abuse that if you really could do it, my gosh, you could probably restore a surplus in a very few years.
Is there anybody out there, in purely in politics, is there any congressman, senator, governor that articulates well your positions?
Well, I don't know about what I've seen of Governor Rick Perry of Texas has impressed me. He said something that so many Republicans don't seem to understand. He said the Republican Party cannot be all things to all people. Now, there's a certain brand of Republicans out there who say that, we've got to appeal to all the different constituencies, and we've got to moderate our programs and rhetoric and so forth in order to do that. Now, that sounds very plausible, but if you go from plausibility to facts, the fact is that Ronald Reagan was elected in 2 consecutive landslides, and he didn't do any of those things. He did the opposite of those things. And I doubt if half of the people who voted for Ronald Reagan agreed with him on everything he said. But they understood that the man had something he believed in, that he was for real, and if they thought that most of what he said made sense and would probably help the country on that balance, that was sufficient for them to vote for him. He didn't go around saying, this is what I will do for Hispanics, this is what I will do for blacks, et cetera, et cetera.
What about this president? What do you believe he believes in?
He believes first and foremost in himself. I have never for one moment believed that Barack Obama had the best interests of the United States at heart. I have seen no speck of evidence to indicate that, and I've seen tons of evidence to indicate the opposite. This whole business about trying to force banks, which is to say the people who deposit their money in the banks, that the people who save their money and put it in banks should be the ones who pay for people who didn't save their money, so that they took on mortgages they can't pay. And now they must be kept in those very same houses. It's not a question of throwing them out in the street. There are apartments, after all. I've lived in them more than half my life. But that because they happen to be there, they have some kind of squatter's rights, and it's up to people who put their money in the banks to subsidize them for their irresponsible behavior. Now, it doesn't take more than a few generations of that, and you will have a totally different ethos in the country. A recent study, for example, and this is not totally on point here, but I think it's relevant, shows that something like 90% of high school students admit they have cheated. There was a time when that would just not be there. They wouldn't do it, and the few who did it certainly wouldn't admit it. But if you have a society where everyone feels it's okay to cheat, that society is coming apart.
Yeah, a free society is only possible if people are ethical.
Yes. And vigilant.
Yeah.
And vigilant.
Yeah. Now, talking about the origins of the housing crisis, we've gone over this, but it's worth repeating for people because the Democrats tell us that the origins are all Wall Street. How would you answer them in a nutshell?
The one key fact without which there would not have been a housing crisis is that people stopped paying their mortgages. Now, as long as people kept paying their mortgages, it doesn't matter what kind of doesn't matter that much what kind of foolish policies might have been followed here or there somewhere else in the chain of these events. But when the money stops coming in, the system is going to collapse. And the question then becomes, how come the money didn't keep coming in? And the answer is the government forced lenders to lend to people they didn't want to lend to, but to whom the politicians wanted them to lend to, and who did not have the credit rating or whatnot that would make them good risk for a mortgage. And moreover, the politicians have learned nothing. At least they've learned nothing that's of use to the country. What they have learned is they can get away with doing this, and the Justice Department is already threatening people again, the lenders, that if they don't lend to enough minority mortgage applicants to suit the Justice Department, they'll take legal action. Well, that's not in favor to minorities, because the minorities have been harder hit than others when the whole thing collapsed.